Welcome to the Ashby Village Science and Ideas Group. Today, my name is Joe Evinger. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Christopher Ategeka. Chris is an award-winning engineer, entrepreneur, and author. He's published the book, The Unintended Consequences of Technology, which focuses on the challenges and opportunities in the intersection of technology, humanity, and our planet, rather encompassing subject. Here's a copy of the book here. I've been working my way through. I tried to speed read it and got so caught up in it, I just had to read every word. Today, he's also the founder and general partner at a Startup Playbook, a pre-seed fund that supports software startup companies run by women and other entrepreneurs traditionally underrepresented in the capital market. Before that, he was founder and board chair of Health Access Corps, which focuses on strengthening healthcare systems in Africa using local talent to combat the extreme shortage of healthcare services in underserved regions. He accomplished this by building bicycle and motorcycle ambulances to facilitate the emergency transport of patients to healthcare facilities. When do you sleep, Chris? He also built mobile clinics by refurbishing abandoned school buses and converting them into hospitals on wheels to allow patients to access healthcare services in underserved areas of Africa. He's won many international honors for his work. He was in Forbes magazine, quote, 30 under 30, unquote, list. He's an Ashoka Fellow, a TED Fellow, World Economic Forum, young global leader. Most recently, Chris was honored by Chancellor Carol Christ at Cal Bears trustees with a 2021 Mark Bingham Award for Excellence and Achievement by a young alumnus in the past 10 years. Chris has got a resume that you'd expect someone to see someone on the screen who's closer to our age demographic, but that is not the case. Chris is closer to half of our age. So he's certainly done quite a bit already in his relatively young career. Chris today is going to talk about the challenges and opportunities at the intersection of technology, humanity, and our planet, with the hope that our conversation will shine a new light on the unintended consequences of technology, a very big picture kind of presentation. And with that, I hand it over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for the invitation and for having me. I appreciate Sarah for making the connection, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we can have an engaging, wonderful conversation in the next few minutes we're together. So before I dive right into the topic of today, it probably makes a little more sense. Some people like Susan and others, like Sarah, have heard the journey that got me here and inspired me to do the work that I do. So if it's okay with you, Susan and Sarah, to hear this story one more time, it would be, important for folks to really get an understanding of how I got here, how I got inspired to do the work I do, and what keeps me there. And that's going to be the starting point. And then once I tell that little story, I will dive into a PowerPoint presentation that I have that can guide our conversation for the topic of today. So the journey starts in rural Uganda. It's a tiny country in East Africa. I was about 7 or 8 years old when both my parents, my biological parents, died of HIV and AIDS. And I was one of those kids who got hit with, a giant, effect that comes from losing parents. So I became an orphan, and anything that comes with that was a spiral downwards. Eating out of trash cans, being on the street, and anything in between. when I was, so that journey from about 7 or 8 took about another 7 years of really, really hardships of sleeping in the pipes and eating out of trash cans and being homeless and really suffering. Me and for my younger siblings. It's easier when you're alone and extra hard when you have other people to take care of, because they were younger than me. So I was in a way kind of guiding them through this time. So when I was, and my siblings and their story, that's a whole story of its own. But when I was about 15, somebody told me about a nonprofit that helps orphans go to school, and they register orphans and they match them up with a donor in America. A person like you sends a couple dollars a month and you support a kid in Africa and hope their life is better. So I was that orphan, and you might have seen that, such stories on like a milk carton or even on TV, help a kid in Africa. So I was that kid. And the interesting part and the connection with Susan and Sarah is that the family, the sponsor family in America that was sponsoring me in Uganda, happens to be from Oakland, California, and also happens to go to the same church that they go to in Oakland. And Michael and Martha Helms are their names, sponsored me for a period of about 6 years. So just so you get the timeline, it's kind of like an interesting journey from 7 to 15, really, really hard time. 15 to about 20 or 21, that's when I had a sponsor who started paying for my education. I got a bicycle. I got a pair of shoes. I wore my first pair of shoes when I was 17. And I really started working hard in school. And I did well. I did well in school. And they, along the way after I finished high school, they offered to send me to college. And that initial offer was to go to college in Uganda, which I applied and I got into. But then they, something short of a miracle happened where they were like, well, if you get the paperwork, if you get the visa, we'll send you to school in America. And that's how I applied and ended up at UC Berkeley Engineering School. I did undergraduate and graduate school and, went through that education system. Meanwhile, they're paying out of pocket as an international student. So they really, really cared, and they really put their resources toward trying to make my life better. So I'm eternally grateful for their generosity. So I'm a product of someone else's generosity. And from where we stand today, and what inspires me a lot to work in the technology space, is the idea that the components that make us truly human, the love, the empathy, the compassion, the wants, the needs, those are the things that we are slowly losing in the age of technology and algorithms, because algorithms just take the information and they translate it to do some task. They don't have feelings, they don't have emotions, they're just instructions. And trash into a system, trash out of the system. Human beings are complex. We have amazing qualities and we also have terrible qualities. So when we just grab data and just feed it into a system, we get all the good, the bad, and the ugly. And for me, there was no better place to spend my time and my energy and my talent other than working and trying to make technology more humane, and that it's in service of humanity and our planet, as opposed to controlling us and our lives. So that's kind of like the short version of the story. There's so much details in between about my journey, and happy to dive into those questions as we get to the question part of this conversation. So I started a few companies over the years, as Joe mentioned. The companies put me in many different spaces and met interesting people over the years. And over the years, I realized that what is that one thing, that big picture thing that I can work on, I can dedicate my life to, and hopefully I can have a small dent in the bigger picture of the world of technology. And that's how I ended up, when everyone was baking bread in 2020, I was focused on writing a book that got published this year. So the book that I wrote is The Unintended Consequences of Technology. I did a lot of research, and I think I will share my screen now. Let's see if it still works. Do you see my screen? All right, I got some nods.
Yes.
Perfect. Cool. So that's the title of the book. And the way the book is written, I picked about 12 or 13, in total it's like 14, but about 10 or 12 are technologies like 5G and artificial intelligence, genetic engineering. And then I also looked at trends like climate change and things that are, not per se specific technology like big data, which crosses all over all the other technologies, and looked at them independently. Just did a deep dive on the definition of the thing, what it's good for, where the unintended consequences are, and what we can do about it. And the way the book is structured, anybody should be able to like pick the book, turn the pages all the way to the middle, read one chapter, and close that one chapter, and you won't miss. Things are not building off of each other. That's what I'm trying to say. Like every chapter is a standalone. It makes it very easy to read. So for folks who have picked up a copy, I would love to hear your perspective as you finish the book over time. So the unintended consequences of technology. One thing as we dive into this subject that I want to make sure is clear is that this is not an anti-technology conversation. I love technology. I use technology. My family uses technology. So it's very easy to hear someone mention where technology is not serving humanity's best interests. And your first instinct is to dive toward, but, and start to point out all the amazing things. And the reality is that we need to be able to understand that any technology is a double-edged sword. It can do good, it can do bad. And we should be able to hold those truths together at the same time and honor them. Otherwise, we are in denial of one truth if we just want only the good part. And also the second thing I want to mention is that I think right now we are in some form of a trance. It's some sort of like a beat that we are on. And the trance is this song about comfort, is this song about growth, is this song about exponential financial maximization. And so long as things are going great for you, like you click a button and you get to watch your movie, you click a button and food shows up at your door and you click a button. And so everything seems to, we are getting into this space where we are enjoying the benefits of the technology, but blinded from the venom that the technology has, because the good is so good. So I want to make sure that we don't get into that trap of when I mention anything that is kind of appearing to mention the elements that technology is not serving humanity's best interest, you don't fall in the trap of saying, but it is, because you and I know it is. And there's plenty of places and spaces where we talk about how technology is amazing. So that's a caveat that I wanted to start with up top here. So the menu today is going to be just point out 1 or 2 examples of how technology is great, so that we get that out of the way. But then we get to talk about the other side, where technology can also be harmful, and those two truths exist in the same domain. Here's one example. The past year, we've all been trapped in our houses, and up until this amazing technology came around, now we're able to at least semi get to meet and connect and hug our loved ones. If it wasn't for technology, we don't know where things would be today. So technology is amazing. Here's another example. A gentleman in, his name is Dr. Ling. He was able to perform a surgery about 1,800 miles away in China, where a patient was someplace and him, the doctor, was in another place, 1,800 miles away. And he was able to do this via the new technology called 5G. So technology is amazing. So I can go on and on and on here and talk about all the amazing things, how technology is amazing for you and your loved ones in your life. You know all this, the part that doesn't get enough attention is the part where technology may not be serving humanity's best interests. And the reasoning is that there is a lot of dollars it's what I call the misalignment of incentive structures. There's a lot of dollars that are going towards the creation, the development, the growth, build the thing, and trillions of dollars going to that space. But then, and of course, with trillions of dollars comes the marketing and wanting to showcase the amazingness of technology. But then on the other hand, when technology is not serving humanity's best interests, we put donations, like small amounts of all the money. So it's basically you go to a place, you drill a well, an oil well, you cause a bunch of cancer, but you become very, very wealthy. But then you take a little bit of that donation and you come back into that same place and you build a hospital and you call yourself a philanthropist. That's the trap we're in, where there's so much resources going towards the development and towards the incentives are going towards the creation, but limited resources are going toward addressing where it may not be serving us well. So where does it start? It starts at this place. In the past, there has been different terms that refer to citizens of a country. Some people call them citizens, some people call them voters. Other times they are humans, but we moved away from humans to users. And in the medical field, you are a patient. These things may seem very, minor, but they have very, very big implications, from calling someone a human and calling someone a user. So if you look at a graph where a bunch of users utilized your service, but a bunch of users had a bad experience, the feeling from a psychological perspective is totally different from saying 10 humans got affected by my product. It's very easy to call them users and put them zeros and ones. They're just numbers. And you take the emotional component out of it. Then you just look at graphs. Did we grow enough? Did we not grow? Are we in loss? Are we in profit? That was their starting place to take us to this kind of like a removed component. So where do we go? We go to this place where everything is developmental. So no need to want to read this thing at all. This thing, all it's saying is we are pushing for $1 trillion club. There's a bunch of companies that are now $1 trillion worth, and every other company is aspiring to be that. And at all costs, want to be $1 trillion company. And it's very easy to think, let's just break things and we'll fix them later when they break. So the most powerful why right now is that single bottom line, the financial maximization. Everything else is cute. Care about people, that's cute. Care about the environment, that's cute. But can you show me $1 trillion company? Now we're in business. And that misalignment is kind of what's putting us in the current circumstances we find ourselves into, from climate change and other issues that are affecting our planet. The second component is the idea that these companies that are shooting for this single bottom line of financial maximization, they cater so much for their stockholders or shareholders, people who have a stake in this company, mostly investors and other folks. And there's very minimum understanding or the new push is coming right now, but it hasn't been there, the incentive to think about all the stakeholders, and that's humanity and that's our planet. The idea is we're focused solely or so much on the money side. And then that comes with a lot of effects. And you must be living under a rock to haven't seen or heard or been affected by any of these. Fake news, biases, breaking democracies, electronic waste is the next plastics, loneliness and isolation and depression are becoming a public health crisis for young people and anybody else as well. We live in a world where there's so much connectivity, but very little connection. You have 1 million people who are your friends on social media, but you don't have one single friend you can actually call up in case of an emergency. So all these things are what I call the visible. There are some visible side effects of the unintended consequences of our technologies. And there's what I want to call there's the invisible side. So the visible is all these things that you and I have been experiencing the past year, especially, again, breaking democracies, fake news and data breaches, election integrity, like all the stuff that we can see. But then there's the other component. This is what in the discovery that I came about while I was doing the research for the book. The invisible is very high on like a 30,000 foot type of thought process. There are two types of invisible unintended consequences that are happening at the current moment. The first one is this. In the West, all the technologies or most of the technologies are built on this let's make a buck quick type of thought process. That's what I meant by financial maximization. Just build a company, create a cool business model, make a ton of money for yourself and investors. That's the incentive structure. This is the West, Europe, and United States, and the places that value capitalism as a big value for the population. So that's one segment of the invisible side effect of technology. So this one brings us to a place where we get a bunch of people who get a ton of money, leading to lots of inequality, and they one would argue that they earned their dollars and they deserve to have their dollars. But if you think about it, it's like, who needs 297 billion? That was the net worth of this man as of this morning. It hit the high of around 300 in the past couple of weeks. And then we find that while I was doing this research, we find that majority of people who own companies, who owned equity in these companies, are men. And as you can imagine, that has an effect. Or the women and are underrepresented in this equity gap of people who own the companies. The other component is like people of color are even very small. They work for these people, but they don't own a whole lot of stake in these companies. And as you can imagine, that comes with a lot of from control and the direction, representation of what technology is created, how it's created, really matters who is in the leadership position. So that is the one invisible unintended consequence of technology. Creating technology just for the sake of making money, and we will fix everything else as they come about. And that's the thought process. The second invisible type of technologies we're creating right now is the citizens' mind control type of technology. So this one is mostly like countries like China and Russia and North Korea, and the dictatorships and authoritarians alike are mostly focused on building this technology. And what's interesting is like, it's the same mechanism. We're calling it artificial intelligence, just taking a bunch of data and learning about your citizens, but the intention is different. In the West, is like they want to know your age, where you stay, where you sleep, the children you have, the car you drive, and the intention there is just to figure out how they can sell you the next car or they can sell you the next shoe. In this mind control world, the intention is, it's the same mechanism, same technology, but the intention is different. How do you control the populace? How are you able to control the flow of information, how people connect, the flow of resources among the populace? And as a consequence, there are two worlds that are being built right now. We're building technology. And again, I'm using artificial intelligence as just one example, but it applies in most of the technologies. We're building a technology called artificial intelligence. And in one part of the world, like half of the population of the world, it's being utilized for one intent, and the building and perfecting is around, let's make money. And the other half of the world, the building and perfection is about, how do we control the populace? As you can see, over time, those two technologies are, and those two populations will be living on planet Earth, but living in totally two different worlds. So some examples of a citizen control type of technology and mindset in China. There's this young woman who was a superstar in that country. Everybody loved her. And for some reason, she got into some sort of a, not on the good side. She got on the bad side of the government, and they literally erased her existence on the internet because they were able to do that. Like, how can you do that? How can someone go on the internet and erase your existence? And there was a huge uproar, and there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about this story about how do you erase a person off the internet? And that's the idea, that a government has the levers and they're able to control, your access points as a population. The other example in this mind control world, in the West, where they're making the money and becoming powerful because you're Jeff Bezos or you're Elon Musk or you're Bill Gates, there is that freedom because making the money is being incentivized. in this culture of the mind control culture, even having the money doesn't matter, because this gentleman happens to be one of the richest people in Asia, and he was the richest man in China. And he also got on the bad side of the government. And starting last year, they were able to hold him down, knock him on the head, slap him on the wrist, and he has literally disappeared. Like no one knows where he is, but he just disappeared, and his net worth went down, crushing, because he was becoming too powerful in that market that does not entirely support make all the money, but it entirely supports figuring out how to make the technology control the populace. So in those two worlds, we find ourselves in this place of the haves and the have-nots. A vaccine is a good example. And even the current virus, the new virus, is because there's a whole subset of the world population that's not vaccinated. Us here in the US, we're getting our third shot. And in fact, the Pfizer chief talked about a fourth shot today. People here are getting vaccinated, 2, 3, 4 times over, but the global South is still waiting on their first shot. Or the other side is, if you look at technology like genetic engineering, where you're like able to physically change the structure of our human bodies, or technologies like bioengineering of other kinds, where Elon Musk and people like him are creating chips you can implant in someone's brain. If we have this world of the haves and have-nots, it's going to come a time where literally the human being on one part of the world capabilities and what they can do is totally different from where the other people are, because the one in the haves world, it has been enhanced. They're able to enhance it. In the have-nots world, they're still kind of lagging behind. Again, building these two worlds. And so where is the hope in all of this? It may come off as everything is doom and gloom. Personally, I feel like, and that's where I started, we need to go away from the us and go back into the them. We need to go back into looking at each other as allies and looking at the world as interconnected, as opposed to the world of independence and wanting to be to each their own, right? The idea that you take care of yourself, and if you're sad or you're depressed or you have any issue, there's an app for that. And we've disconnected from the living and being human. Where I come from in Uganda, people are not as resourced, but people tend to care for each other, even in the lack of resources. And the reasoning is that in order for me to have sugar tomorrow, I need to give you salt today, in a way of buying myself a favor that when tomorrow I have a need, I'll come to you and you take care of me. If I'm sick, you help me carry my child to school, to the hospital. If I have a wedding, you celebrate with me. If I have a death in the family, you come help and mourn with me. We've lost that in the West. It's like every single person is on their own, and that's creating this like we are removed from each other and we're living in our little bubbles. We need also to go back to humans, not looking at people as numbers, not looking at people as users. It's so dehumanizing, and also takes that component of accountability out of the picture, because people just could say, I had X users on my platform or my technology. We need to move away from stockholders or shareholders to stakeholders, looking at the planet, looking at our human experience as part of the bigger interconnected system. Until we do these things, we're going to find ourselves going back in that loop of, to each their own. The more you have for yourself, you've earned it and you should keep it. And this little slide really says it well. When you put a word me and you put a mirror underneath the me and it flips, it becomes we. So we need to go back to the we. And here are some of the thoughts on where we have the power as individuals. There are three types of votes. The first vote is the vote of the ballot that everybody talks about. And when someone says vote, that's what comes to mind. This is where you vote for people who care about your issues, who cares and represents the things you care about, who represents your values. The second type of vote is the vote with your wallet. Everything you buy, you're actually voting and letting that company, that individual, that technology, whatever the thing is, know that they're great. They should create more of that. So that's a power that you and I have. The third vote that a lot of people don't even think about nowadays in our world of technology and social media is the vote of your attention. Anything you click on, any article you read, any ad you click on, anything you're clicking on, you are incentivizing that technology company, that social media to create more of that because that's their business model. That's how they make money. They capitalize off your attention. And if you don't want the thing to be, incentivized, then you don't give it the attention. The whole social media world is a business model is centered around incentive structures. It's the positive reinforcement, it's the negative reinforcement, and it's the extinction. So the positive reinforcement, you watch an article, you click on an ad and you stay on it for 5 minutes, they're keeping track of how long you listen to that video. And then they send you more of that. This whole creepy thing where somehow Facebook knows the friends you should be friends with, or Instagram knows the next video you should watch, all that is capitalizing off your attention without you even knowing that it's happening on the back end. So where you put your attention, you're voting, you're giving them the signal that they should make more of that. And the last slide here, I would say, is that I believe technology has surpassed religion as the new religion for the world. We spend so much time worshiping our technology devices. And 100 years from now, because we're in this trance of comfort and the trance of growth and trance of maximization of profits, 100 years from now, we may have a world that's really well optimized and it works for everyone, no inequality, the world is great, or we may not have any world left to optimize if we don't pay attention now. So that's it for me for now, and I will open it up to conversations and questions. I'm excited to dive into more here. It's less about me talking, but more if you have a comment you want to add, feel free to do that. It doesn't have to be questions, to me. So thank you for listening. I appreciate you much.
Well, I want to thank you, Chris, for the presentation to begin with. I would like to open it up for questions. Would someone like to go first? Feel free to click on your.
Yeah, Roger had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, my question was, how can we start to see the natural world as one of the stakeholders and not just the resources to be exploited?
Great question, Roger. Great question. We live in a world today where a tree only has value when it's cut down. That's how we are looking at it. And as time has gone on with climate change, we are realizing that actually the tree has more value staying up or standing up. So there has been a few movements going on trying to make laws that give rights to the natural world, the same rights we have as humans. And I think there's a few groups that you should look up, just typing into Google, rights to the natural world. There's a few folks are fighting really hard to make that possible. And I think that's one way, one approach. And the reasoning is that we find ourselves in this mess, in whatever mess we're in, because of the misalignment of incentive structures and the misalignment of seeing what is valuable. And looking at a tree from lumber and timber, and that's the only value you see, that's a very narrow approach of looking at the natural world, from waterways and trees and all these other things in the natural world. So yeah, starting from giving the natural world rights is a good starting point, but also figuring out how we shift the value system of when we see the natural world and what it represents.
Thank you.
Ferenc has a question. Do you want to ask a question on audio or have me read it? Question is, how can societal systems catch up with the rapid change in technology?
That's a great question. If I can figure that out, I'll be in a really good shape. The idea is that in the past industrial way of building the world and when the Industrial Revolution happened and the scientific revolution happened and we started to alter our natural world in the form of technology, over the years, policy was more often than not ahead of the invention. So a good example is if we wanted to go to the moon, someone would propose the idea to Congress, and then Congress will vote on the idea of let's go to the moon. And then somebody will have to come up with a budget, and then the Congress will vote on the budget. And then after so many processes and going through a lot of rigor in trying to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's, we're like, all right, let's go to the moon. So that analog way of invention is outdated. It's outdated, and we're in a world where there's exponential growth that policy is not keeping up with the innovation. And that's what puts us in this space where we're at. People in Washington, D.C., taking a year to react. In a year, there's a whole technology that's been created and has had positive and negative impact alike. So to be quite honest, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to how we can make sure that those two things can keep up with each other, because the exponential growth is so fast. The incentive structures of making money are so strong. And also the people with the money who make all this money from technology buy the systems. In Uganda, where I'm from, or in most African countries, if someone took money who is in politics, they will call that bribe. And you will be crucified for your bribe. But in the West, we've made that legal, and we call that lobbying. And it's a very fancy term to mean bribe, but we call it lobbying. So anyone with, outsized wallet who makes a lot of money in technology, they're able to donate to politicians who will keep voting for the things they like. They are able to pay for lobbyists and put a whole army of them in Washington, D.C. to keep the policy going their direction. And so you realize that we are in this space where money is kind of controlling everything else that we're doing. So sorry, I don't have a good answer. If I do, I'll be very wealthy.
Thank you. Audrey had a question.
Well, I wanted you, Chris, if you would, to go a little bit more into specifics about how people's values can be changed so that they value the natural world enough to protect it and save it.
I had a very funny joke in the book that I talked about to kind of speak a little bit to this. It was kind of meant to be joking, but it could be implemented if we're able to, which is if we were able to, so currency, money, the dollars or all those things are made up. They've been made up over the years. There's a time where tulips were currency, in Amsterdam. So money has been made up and value to money has been given to it by us humans. So if we're able to create similar psychological mindset around the value of the natural world, I think we should be able to accomplish what you were alluding to. So the funny example I gave in the book was about how about if you are in a capitalistic system and you make up to $1 billion, you get a certificate, you won capitalism, and you get a dog park named after you, or maybe a school gate named after you. And then anything you make above and beyond that is to make humanity better. And whatever the better is, it could be planting trees, it could be helping other people. We put a much bigger value to that than the dollars. And if we're able to figure out how we can psychologically play that, I think we can get people to realize the value that our trees have. But otherwise, we are still trapped in a capitalistic system that says, what is it that's going to make me more money?
Naomi has a question. Unmute, Naomi.
Thank you. Yeah, so what can an ordinary person who is not a billionaire do to help this situation, to improve this situation? Besides, I mean, things like you recycle, you're being conscious of where you put your money, and besides all that, how can you improve these consequences?
You vote. Those 3 votes. I think that's the best we have at the moment. We will need to do more because the people who have the dollars have an outsized impact. So the way I look at it is like this invisible arm that's playing a chess game. So you and I are like chess pieces on a chessboard. And this invisible arm has so much power. They have power in politics, they have power and influence in the media, and like all the places that move the world. And they're just moving the pieces. And we can just, hold all the signs we want and go on the street and protest or whatever it is. It's not going to make a whole lot of a difference. And that's why you've not seen too many movements succeed. In the past 50 years, you would see people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. Like literally you can count them on your hands where people rise up and it's the revolution that has the change. But for the most part, the individual who has their dollars has such an outsized impact on everything that affects us. So here's an answer you may not particularly like, Naomi, and this is this. Every movie in Hollywood, every book you've ever read, it's mostly written with an arc that shows there's a hero and then there's a villain. Almost 95% of the time, the hero wins at the end of the book. And you leave like feeling happy and excited that, this was an amazing story because the person you were rooting for won. And I'm afraid the way we are going right now, unless something fundamentally change, the hero may not win. And humanity may as well end up extinct. And that is a very harsh and sad truth, but very hard to tell at the same time, which is we are on a path that's literally taking everything away from what will sustain life on this planet. And we're like extracting it. So this extraction mindset, until it fundamentally changes, the hero, who is quote unquote the hero because we are looking at ourselves as the heroes on this planet, we may not succeed. And that is the sad truth.
Thank you.
Sarah's waiting to ask a question.
So Chris, I don't think that you're a pessimist. So in spite of what you've just said, those of us who know you and those of us who read your book and who've listened to you today, I think we'll leave your talk with a fair amount of optimism. And we at Ashby Village participate in several movements that are part of the kind of work that you are doing. And in our little way, we're all trying to make these differences. My main thing I wanted to say though was to put in a plug for your TED Talk. And if there's a way you can explain to people how to get to your TED Talk, or they Google your name or whatever and give Google some more money, whatever. But I found it very, very, very interesting. I've heard versions of your TED Talk several times as you've been a presenter, as we've seen each other over the years. But I really recommend it to all of you because the whole backstory is pretty amazing. And I'm so grateful to you for today. This was great.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you. I'll put the link to my personal website right there. It has a TED Talk. It has a box where you can send me an email and we chat and connect. If you want to reach out, happy to chat more. The TED Talk is on there as well. But yeah, thank you. I don't think I'm a pessimist person. I'm very optimistic. And that's kind of why I'm able to keep such a positive energy around a subject that could, be really draining for a lot of people. And I attribute this to, if I'm to point at one personal trait that has helped me navigate this life, I would say I always try to find a little light in every darkness, and every corner I've been pushed into, I always try to find a light. So there is a way for us as humans to turn the page, to realize that a dead planet is not a good place to have a business or get rich or be extracting things. And once we realize that, then we can start to turn a page on trying to figure out different incentive systems that are not all grounded in a very, very extractive capitalistic economy.
Right, thank you. Roger had another comment.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the traits of an audience like this, where we're all in the last years of our lives, I've seen all around the world, older people sort of start to take stock of what they've done and what they've accomplished, and their family and so on and so forth. And of course, one of the things is you want to help your family prosper, but many cultures have some concept of worth, of spiritual worth, let's put it that way, that that they may feel that they weren't a terribly good person in their life, but they had to do what they did to get the money, and so they've kind of run roughshod over things, or they've committed some sins of in their blind search for success, and then they look back and they think, well, gee, maybe if I in the in the Christian church, the Catholic Church anyway, you know, they can pay the priest to say prayers for them, you know, or they can, in the Buddhist faith, they can build a pagoda, and that will earn them merit. And so it made me think that, you know, as older people, we have some concept, you know, cross-cultural, of karma, of some spiritual value that we think we've accumulated. But you know, there's no way to measure the karma that I'm aware of. And I was just thinking, you know, I liked your idea of saying, okay, Jeff Bezos, you know, you got plenty of money, you know, that's accomplished. Now let's try to work on your karma. You know, let's try to earn merit. I mean, money isn't merit. Money is just money. And so my thought was to create a bank of karma, and that, you know, people would earn points based on helping others, or planting trees, or sponsoring a child to go to school, or, you know, whatever the thing may be. So anyway, that's my my thought about the contribution, measuring in some way.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'm sorry, you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris, in your book, I'm looking at page 21, where you talk about the tech states. That really struck me. You pointed out that Facebook has 2.7 billion users. You pointed out that Google has 1 billion users. Their valuations both are approaching in the area of $1 trillion. These are numbers the size of India. Can you talk about these tech giants and what kind of future battles they might play against each other or with each other?
Yeah, no, so the chapter that Joe is alluding to is a chapter about tech state and a nation state. So a nation state is has very specific things they are supposed to provide to the citizens, you know, security and care and protection, and all these things, from economics to social to political effects that the government is supposed to provide for its citizens. Then what happens when you have a technology company started by a handful of citizens from that specific country that ends up being so powerful, so big in terms of numbers and population, in terms of dollars? You kind of compare the dollars of that tech company versus the dollars of the GDP of that country. And the company turns out to be so powerful that, to a point that even the country of origin could decide to push that company, the said company, out. They could ban all its citizens from being on that platform, and that company will still be profitable and will have more people than the country where they started the company. And that's where all these big tech companies sit, where they have so much population, so much dollars, that even the countries that are so willing and they want to regulate and try to bring some order in this chaos, they just don't have the power. They really don't. In the European Union, they summoned Mark Zuckerberg to show up for the position. And there's a famous picture on the internet where there's all these parliamentarians seated in a circle, and the seat they had prepared for Mark Zuckerberg with his name tag on it was empty because he refused to show up. What do? Right? There's not much you can do because the person is so powerful. All this to say that the tech state is becoming a country of its own, and they have their own ambassadors in all these different tiny governments, because their population the population of a government, of any government or any country, is just a subset of their population. And it puts the governments in such an awkward position in trying to pass regulation when the person you're trying to pass, it's like the equivalent of a parent having a child who became so rich and they buy you a house and they buy you a car, and then you're trying to tell them to go back in their room. You're not going to take that. So that's where we're at.
I think Alan had a comment.
I have several comments. I just put another one up. The advertising is what feeds the companies, and we are avoiding the issue of use less, big less, which isn't going to happen. It's us, not, they are, in a sense, institutions. I also don't like the association of individuals with institutions whose behavior is conditioned by their institutional nature, by what they're there for. Anybody, in a sense, could run them and get rich. But the amount of money the rich person, Bezos may be an exception. There may be individual exceptions, but big industry, big ag, big pharma, big everything, most of the money doesn't go to the individual who happens to run it. It does go to investors, and there is an institution underneath. And I don't want to comment too much or take too much time, but I don't want to leave without the comment of evolution, both cultural evolution and cultural fertility. They're big concepts. They need to be recognized. I don't know what they can do, but we can't just stop thinking that we can run everything if we just run it right.
That's great points, Alan. Great points. And
Thank you.
the COVID-19, one would argue, that is just one example of nature telling us, like warning shots, saying, hey, if you do not behave, you are pushing yourself to the limits. There is no such a thing as waste in nature. Think about it. There's no such a thing as waste. If a tree grows up, it drops the leaves are food for something else, and it feeds the tree back again, and the tree falls down, it feeds something. Like, it's always a loop. And
but both of those avoid the issue of number and time.
Yeah. And
it's easy if you forget numbers. You can prove almost anything.
Correct. And that's why when we came around, we just started creating things that are not in the cycle, in that loop. And nature will fight back. And we are starting to see some of those examples, and climate change is one of those.
Yeah, but we are also worrying too much about who did it and less about how to fix it. The joining of responsibility with action is somehow slowing down, in fact, or else destroying the action. There's too much, we've got to stop, we did this. And we, of course, is the developed world, and that gets to be a whole other question that you will have some experience that I don't have.
Yeah, no, but
I've said enough.
No, you're good. No, I would also argue that we can't really understand the problem until we point out its source, until we point out where it's coming from as a beginning point of looking at data, and then thinking about the solution. What we've done so far, so much of, is trying to ignore the problem. And I think that's kind of where we find ourselves in trouble.
I don't know that we've ignored the problem. We've assigned where it's coming from to where it's convenient to assign where it's coming from. Anybody who deals with climate change must realize that carbon dioxide is extremely soluble in the oceans. There's a lot of ocean. That's the soda effect, because that's what soda water is. And until you deal with that chemistry or that science, we can stop worrying about the people and what they do. But that's ignored because it's much easier to blame the people. We have to do something. And there's much more to that. Again, I don't want to, there's many tales, T-A-I-L-S and T-A-L-E-S, that could be connected to that particular animal. Oh, I do want to add one thing. We learn imagination in infancy. Nobody is born with the ability to explain or to understand explanation. The food arrives, the warmth arrives, something happens, or else we don't live. Those who live get what they get without explanation. Eventually, we learn explanation. But this question of faith is based on this infancy, need, belief, understanding of the impossible. And that opens up another tale. Maybe it's the head.
Maybe it's a head, maybe it's a tail.
At least we're thinking. That's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
we're good at.
Good start to think. Right, right.
So looks like we're about finished with questions. Let me try one final question for you, Chris. What would you like to be doing in 5 years from now?
5 years from now.
And whatever.
No, I would hope to be in a place where we have shifted to more regenerative systems and more systems that put into consideration our human existence and our planet. So anything I'm doing or want to do between now and then is gearing towards that. But I'm just one person, and the problem is so big. And, it has to go back to the idea of, you do your part, I do my part. It may seem very small at the time, but the summation of our parts can lead to a larger sum. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, very much for the presentation. This is one of our longest question and answer periods, which you should take as a compliment. People have seemed to be really engaged in what you're saying, because it does affect all of us. So from Ashby Village, I'd just like to thank you for your presentation, and thank you all for coming today.
Thank you, Joe and Chris.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
You
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you.
All right. We will then sign off. Thank you.